Earlier this year, an Australian diver made headlines round the world when he lost his life in a remote cave in South Africa. Dave Shaw was the world champion in the most extreme sport of all, technical diving. He was on a mission to recover the body of another diver 270 metres down on the cave floor. Nothing like it had ever been attempted before. Tonight, exclusively, we bring you the inside story and pictures of Dave Shaw's final dive.
The whole time since David died has seemed very unreal. I never went with David when he went diving. I am not at all interested in diving. In fact, I don't really like getting my head wet. I could never really see what he saw in it, but I could see his passion. I think he enjoyed the challenge of exploring and particularly of going where other people had never been before. There's not too many places left on the planet where you can do that now.
South Africa was definitely a place that my father really loved. And he didn't just go there to dive, I think he genuinely enjoyed the country. It was actually very difficult because he died so unexpectedly and he died so far away. Dad was only 50 when he died. He was very young at heart. He approached the world with the wisdom of a 50-year-old, but with the desires of a 20-year-old. And he was always striving to learn new things, acquire new skills, and push the boundaries. Mum and I wanted to come to South Africa just to see all the places that meant so much to my father and to meet the people he spent his last days with. We especially wanted to meet Gordon Hiles, who was making a documentary with Dad and who was taking us around, and Don Shirley and his wife Andre. Don was my father's main support diver on that particular dive.
There they are. Lovely to meet you at last. Hi.
Hi. Oh, it's good to meet you.
I hadn't met Don before, but I'd heard a lot about him because he and David had been diving together for some years.
Conversation?
Oh, it's nice to see you.
David thought very highly of Don. There was a bond between them.
I met Dave about 2 or 3 years ago. He had a lot of charisma about him. He knew what he was talking about, but he wasn't brash with it. And we had a quick dive and we hit it off straight away. Me and him were very much on a similar sort of level of diving. We had some good time. We used to, it was like a duo. We'd go down and dance together, as it were. It was nice.
David was collecting some of this Grange wine, and so I thought I'd bring you a bottle.
To meet Dave's wife and his daughter Lisa was a very nice experience for us to be able to talk to each other and sort of console each other.
And I brought you a book to encourage you to come and visit. David and I were married for 30 years. It was a very, very happy marriage. We met at the Baptist youth camp in Serpentine, just south of Perth. David came up and introduced himself. I had this irresistible urge to look at him, and every time I looked at him, he was looking at me, and so I'd turn away. Yes, something strange had happened. I didn't know what it was. I was a bit young, I think. But I think it was love at first sight, but at 17, I didn't understand these things. At the time, he was working as a pilot spreading superphosphate out of Bunbury, south of Perth. Our first date was up in an aeroplane. I was really scared, didn't look out the window. He always loved to fly, and the aerial spraying was his passion because it was really flying the aeroplane to its limits. He did have a couple of accidents early on, but I was happy for him to do it because that was what he loved. And I knew he was always very cautious and very careful, but I married him fully knowing that there was a risk that one day something unexpected might happen and he might not come home.
When my sister Lisa and I were born, my dad was flying for Missionary Aviation Fellowship in Papua New Guinea, a Christian airline organisation that flies missionaries around and also transports goods, doctors, medical supplies in areas where only planes can reach. Our faith was an extremely important part of our life. My dad did believe that God was always watching over him and looking out for him. He did believe that God cared for him. In 1989, my dad got a job with Cathay Pacific, and so he moved up to Hong Kong.
Wow, do you want me to carry them down for you?
He was fun to be around, but he did find that doing his best was very important. My dad pushed the boundaries not because he felt he wanted to amaze others or show people what could be done, but for his own benefit, to see how far he could go, to see what he could do. About 7 years ago, I learned to scuba dive, and then the next year, my dad and I went diving, and he learnt to scuba dive. At the time, he was 43. He found that he really enjoyed it, and he wanted to go further, go into wrecks, and then into caves. Fairly soon he found scuba diving too tame, and he found out about rebreathers, a system where the air is recycled and it allows you to go deeper and longer underwater. So he eventually bought his own rebreather and he modified it so that he could take it to even greater depths and spend longer at those depths.
On the 28th of October 2004, Dave attempted and achieved a world record dive to 270 metres at Bushman's Cave, which is located in the northern Cape of South Africa, west of Johannesburg.
Wasn't very steep, and when I saw the body over on to my left, I thought, oh, well, that's the end of going deep. So,
in the course of the dive, Dave found the body of the Andrea, who'd been lost in that cave 10 years previously.
I was really puffing and panting, so I didn't think it was real good at 260 metres.
No.
And so I just tied my line to it.
I think when Dave surfaced, he'd already had in his mind that he wanted to go down and retrieve the body. In fact, he felt connected to it in some way because he had found the body. And he said to me a little while afterwards that he actually dreamt a couple of days before that dive that he found the body in exactly the same position as what he actually found it. And that was incredible. DeAndrea was a 20-year-old chap. He was doing an air dive, was at 70 metres, and we believe that he had a deep water blackout.
2-3 times a year we went to visit Dion, put fresh flowers down at Bushman's. It came as a surprise that Dave Shaw was there. I arranged that I meet up with Dave. And he said, Theo, now there's a project. I will fetch your son. And of course I'm excited. Being parents, I can speak for my wife and myself. It doesn't matter what remains. It remains your son. To most people, yes, it's a bag of bones. To us, it's not. It's still our son, and it will always be.
As soon as Dad got home to Hong Kong, he immediately started preparing for the dive, and 2 months later he was back at Mount Carmel, the safari farm where Bushman's Cave is located. It was a groundbreaking dive. I mean, a body retrieval at such depths was something new. No one had ever done it before.
You do it somewhere where it's cold. Oh, it's cold.
When Dave decided to go back to recover Dion's body, we agreed then that it would be a good idea to make a documentary film.
I was trying to get the angle right. Let me just go down and think about that now.
Okay. The idea of the helmet camera, initially Dave had some apprehension about it.
It's just moving slightly on my head when I make fairly violent movers, which I think is what I'll end up doing.
With cave diving, they don't want to use anything on their heads. But in this case, there wasn't really much other option, and Dave understood that and was happy to work within the limitations that it might present.
I suspect this one will be much more stable when I'm moving my head around in the water than this helmet here.
So we just have to drill a few holes on the front there to get it at about the right angle. We should be in business.
Yeah.
I think it's important that I see this place that David loved so much, just to bring me some peace of mind.
I find myself in this beautiful location once again in January 2005 so that I can repeat the world record dive in an attempt to recover Dion Dreher's body so that the Dreher family can finally put closure to this very sad chapter in their lives.
I had quite mixed feelings about this dive. I was quite anxious about it, but I did try and reassure myself that the planning that David put into it was meticulous.
The cave itself is quite unique. You've clambered down rocks. At the bottom is a little puddle. And in the corner, you can actually go down. There are ropes at the entrance, and it's a small slot. It is very much like a chimney that gradually gets wider. Once you're past 60 metres, you're into the main cave, which is a huge cathedral-type affair. In Dave's dive, we had a rope that went from the ceiling, and on that rope, if you shone the light in any direction, you wouldn't be able to see the side at all. So it was very much like a void. So you were going down in the void, and the only reference was the rope itself. Dion's body we believed to be a skeleton. So what we were most afraid of is attempting to move the body and then bones falling away. So in order to prevent that happening, Dave designed a body bag which Anne made for him.
At 270 metres, it is quite a task. I only have 5 minutes to do that, so when I get to Dion, I have to put him in the bag, cut him out of the gear, and if possible, and I have the time, I'm also going to tie a rope to his equipment, which is stuck in the mud.
David was very optimistic. He was very excited about it. However, we both knew that there was possibly something would happen that he couldn't plan for. I was afraid that when we said goodbye, that it was the last time.
When the Drehers arrived at Mount Carmel, they seemed to be in a pretty upbeat mood. Their plan was to be at the waterside to receive the body.
Hi, how you going, Marie? Lovely to see you. Lovely to see you.
I think the Drehers were almost in awe over what Dave was going to be doing.
I really must emphasise that the most important person on the dive is you. It's better to have one person dead than two. Okay? It's as simple as that.
The day before the dive, we had a meeting of just the divers.
And when I meet Don at 220 metres or thereabouts, I'll be handing Dion to Don. The next people that I meet at the 150 metres, I'm handing the camera over to them.
I believe that Dave was 100% confident, as was I, that he could actually achieve that task and come back.
Well, it's 5:35 now, so I'm just suiting up in slow time.
The day of the dive, Dave got down there first. bearing in mind that it was going to be 12 hours in the water for him, so he needed to start early.
The secret of a happy dive is a warm dive.
Majority of that was the decompression. Getting down to the bottom is a matter of 12 or 13 minutes, and your task down there, you can't really allow yourself to stay longer than 5 minutes.
David called me on the Saturday morning and said that he was going to the dive site, and I wondered, I wonder if you're diving today. And I didn't ask him because I didn't want to know.
It's just begun.
Dave made his descent at 6:15, had his video camera in place, and we actually shook hands before he went, and I think we said, see you later. A lot of people say you're crazy, and why'd you go and do this diving into the extreme depths in caves, which is probably just about the worst combination that there is in terms of extremity. It's a bit like Star Trek, to boldly go where no man has been before. If you have very, very powerful lights, then it's actually very clear. You feel relaxed, it's another world. Crystal world, bright lights. It's not dark and dingy, it's a beautiful place.
The operation to recover Dion's body ended up as a massive operation involving 25 to 30 people.
Yeah, I've seen them.
Dave had appointed Verna van Skyke, the current women's world deep diving record holder, as the dive coordinator.
That's 30 seconds, sir.
And everything was working to clockwork.
The timing on the dive was quite critical. I began my dive exactly 13 minutes after Dave. My aim was to meet Dave at 220 metres. By the time I got to 150 metres, I couldn't see any sign of Dave coming back. But what I did see was a single still light, no movement at all. Now, at that point, I knew there was a potential problem, because at that time, I'd expect to have seen Dave coming back. I said to myself, here I go, I'm going down to the bottom. Just after I passed the 240-metre line, I heard a click, and then I heard a crack, and I knew exactly what that was, that something had actually imploded. And sure enough, when I looked at my handset, the handset itself had actually gone. Still, I could see Dave's light in the distance, still no movement. But at that stage, I had to look after myself.
Kira, you can kids, okay? Let's move it over.
I'm strong. Body's taking a bit of stress, but yeah, I think the subconscious is probably just blocking it out a little bit. But yeah, we're just praying for Dave and pray that everything goes well.
Yeah, okay.
The plan was that at around about an hour 20, an hour 30 minutes after the start of Dave's dive, that Dion's body should be coming to the surface.
Please start is 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
I noticed at around about that time a little bit of anxiousness, a little bit of tension, especially with Dion's parents, Theo and Maury Dreyer. Eventually a slate came up from the divers at 150 metres, and that stated, no Donald Dave, only one light below. So that was the first warning that there was something that had gone off plan.
You've read the slate?
Yes.
Okay. No Donald Dave.
Where's low?
No, we'll go to 150 now and wait.
In my mind, I saw two lights below. I was the person who brought the bad news to the surface. At those depths, small errors are often going to be fatal. And it was like a punch in the stomach when I realized that this was probably a tragedy unfolding. Okay, we've got you inside.
A couple of hours into the dive, then eventually a slate came up from Don. The worst fear had actually become a reality.
Don's okay.
Don's okay.
Dave's not coming.
Dave's not coming.
Yeah. I need to get on the radio.
Yeah.
David made arrangements so that if something happened to him, I wouldn't just get a phone call. In fact, he arranged for the minister of our church to come around to tell me, and he said that David hadn't come up. They were still hoping he might come up. But it had been 5 hours.
Doc says if he's breathing, don't bring him up straight away. We need to make a decision. If he's not breathing, then bring him up.
Malcolm is going to give us a syringe, and we're going to take some pills down.
By this stage, the situation for Don looked very, very dangerous, and it got to a point where he was fighting for his life because he experienced this middle ear bend, and that just turned everything upside down for him.
No, he's still vomiting. Vomited just once while I was there. I couldn't believe that he was going to make it. He was vomiting, he was disoriented, he was as pale as anything, and he clearly was struggling with his breathing, struggling with his coordination, and he really, really looked like he was in trouble.
What Don did on that dive, it was just incredible. He was only 4 hours into his dive, so he had a good 8 hours left to do. But the amount of discipline and willpower to be able to stay in the water when you're throwing up, you don't know which way is up, you don't know which way is down, is mind-blowing. I don't think any of us really truly comprehend how much discipline it takes. But if you're doing deep diving, you have no choice. You have to do your decompression, otherwise you really are dead.
Take up slack, 1 meter.
I'd been in the water some 13 hours, and within 22 minutes of hitting the surface, I actually got hoisted up the rock face and put into the decompression chamber, where I spent the next just over 7 hours. After that, I had another 10 treatments over the next 12 days in a decompression chamber.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
4 days later, 2 of the rebreather divers and the police team went back to recover the equipment that was still in the cave. They started singing this Amazing Grace, and it was just a full-on goose flesh type of experience.
But now I see.
It was an incredibly touching scene. It was always hoped or thought that perhaps Dion's body would have been attached to the line, and in some way that Dave's would have been attached as well. And subsequently, that is exactly what happened. Yes, in the strangest, Dave actually fulfilled his task of bringing Dion's body to the surface. The 2 bodies returned to the surface together. I guess it was my main concern at this stage now, whether the camera had actually lasted the distance and survived, because then we were going to have the opportunity to see what went wrong down there.
You can see now he's on the bottom. That's 11 minutes and 13 seconds on the bottom. Now he's got the bag out. There he is, he's at the body now, 12 minutes and 22 seconds. The body was not a skeleton. It had almost mummified. And now the body seems to be floating directly in front of him, which is exactly not what we'd have expected. Now you can see that line is getting everywhere, and his tort's actually caught up in it there. So he's actually got quite a problem on his hands dealing with this thing. Yeah, so he's got the scissors. You can see his hands shaking a bit because he's actually working very hard. He's undone the thing, and now he slips backwards. That line is a serious problem now because it's all over the place. There you can see Dion's mask, and he's decided he's actually going to leave the body. It's on the right time, exactly what we actually thought. He's working quite hard and he's breathing very heavily. And then he gets caught in the line and he's trying to get out. And you can see that he's still working, he's still using the scissors trying to get out, but he's not actually quite making the cuts. Now he had to work even more, which actually produced more CO2, which effectively just puts you to sleep. Yeah, that's where he stays. That's how I saw his light from the distance, really. So that's the end. At the moment, I'm not quite sure exactly what diving I'll be able to do in the future. One possibility is that I won't be able to do these extreme dives again because of the physical damage, and I need to give myself at least 6 months before thinking about any form of decompression diving.
Yeah, David said if anything happened to him, he wanted you to have his gear, so not much use to me, so I brought it with me.
Yeah, I'll put it to good use. Yeah. I'd love to dive at Bushman's again. The fact that Anna's given me Dave's diving gear is, I think it's a bit of a choker, really. I know that I'll get a great sense of joy out of using it, and also feel that Dave's actually with me on the dives as well. When I think about him, it's like he's still here. Even now, I expect to turn around and say, "Hey, Dave, did you see that?" And of course, he's not there.
Some people would think that what David was doing was dangerous, but I feel that if there weren't people like David, then we'd still be driving around in horse and carts. We wouldn't have gone to the moon, we wouldn't have climbed Mount Everest, we wouldn't have had planes to fly if there hadn't been people willing to go beyond the boundaries of human achievement. I wouldn't have changed David for anything. So I couldn't be cross at what he was doing because it was all part of him, and he was the one that I loved.